Hello everybody, I'm Alexy Khrabrov, the organizer of SF Text, and here we're on location at Nitro, where we have the first meetup of 2016, and we start with a talk about data lingua, which lets you query data in natural language. And here with us we have Nikita Ivanov, and he's going to introduce himself and tell us about how he came to build data lingua.
All right, so my name is Nikita Ivanov. Just a few words about myself. I'm a founder of a company called GridGain Systems. I founded a company about 10 years ago, was a CEO for 6-7 years, and I'm also an investor and a key advisor to data lingua. So, very quick with data lingua. Data lingua is what we call a Siri-like interface for your business data. So essentially you can use a free-form natural language to ask any questions about your data and get comprehensive, deep results back. That's in a nutshell what it is.
And so GridGain is a big data company.
Right.
It's in memory fabric.
Right.
So can you tell us, what kind of technology you use in GridGain and what kind of technology you use in data lingua, and kind of how did this idea of data lingua is connected with what you've done with GridGain?
Well, GridGain is a in-memory high-performance fabric, data fabric for storing large data sets in RAM. And that's actually technology that is being used in data lingua for kind of high-performance LNP processing. But they're somehow different. The idea for data lingua came from kind of realization that in the last maybe 5 to 7 years, we've had an explosion of SaaS applications where every company from small startups to larger corporations tend to collect a lot of data, but most importantly, keep that data in ever-growing number of SaaS applications. Almost any company of any size would have at least one CRM for like Salesforce and a variety of marketing automation systems like Google Analytics and Marketo and HubSpot, and project management like Jira and Slack for communication, and something like Workday for HR. List goes on, and that's literally for a small startup. Larger corporations, companies would have dozens of the systems, and the data is basically completely compartmentalized and siloed. And that's something that we've kind of fought in our late 80s, early 90s. And we kind of back to the same story, where we collect a lot of data, and it's really isolated. And the company, a typical business, would have 1 or 2 folks that actually know how to use each particular data source. But there's almost nobody who could basically have the same knowledge of how to query Google Analytics and Salesforce and HubSpot. And therefore, data is not being asked in a proper way. It's very costly to ask for kind of consistent report across multiple data sources. You need to involve engineers, and typically it stretches the days and weeks, and it's very awkward. And if you think about how do you solve this problem, what's common between Salesforce and Marketo? There's nothing. Nothing in common between the two systems. There's completely different data sources, completely different data structures, data architecture, completely different interface. But the only thing that is unique, that is actually shared, is that you can actually ask the question about 2 of them using natural language. I mean, you don't have to be a specialist in Salesforce to ask, what is the average sale from East Coast for the last month?
Right.
You don't have to be a marketing professional to ask, how many web pages been, viewed in our website for the last week. See, those questions can be asked almost by anybody. Yet, if you would go and start learning Google Analytics and Salesforce, it will take you weeks and weeks and weeks of learning to run those reports.
Yes.
That's the fundamental idea, fundamental kind of the backbone idea of data lingua. Why don't we basically shortcut the whole thing? And if you ask the question in normal language, speak or type, we're going to give you back an answer. And today, data lingua launched in a private beta with 1 data source for Google Analytics, which we'll talk today later on. And you can literally, use normal language, speak or type, and the system will respond back to you.
This is awesome. I mean, I had a kind of sneak preview of this, right? And I think it's really amazing. And I agree from big data side and seeing a lot of companies in big data space. I think, especially with mobile devices, natural language is the best way we got.
Right, and kind of in NLP community, we're all kind of excited thinking that natural language is the answer for everything, right? But when it's really the answer for almost everything, talk about exactly mobile. Look at the smartwatch. Look at these phones right here. Do they have a keyboard? No. And 5, 10 years from now, it's kind of long horizon, but we're looking there, looking at our kids today, they're not going to know what the keyboard is. Look at the navigations in our cars. 5 years ago, you were painfully typing it in through some awkward keys on the dashboard. Today, most of the navigations, you talk to them. We're going to have exactly the same way. This transition from the consumer NLP to the enterprise NLP will be very much overnight, because technology is there. We just basically have this lag a little bit between the consumer and enterprise. And especially with the proliferation of multiple data sources and all of them being completely incompatible, there is absolutely no way. Look at Siri. Today, I mean, if you have the Siri or Google now or Cortana from Microsoft, nobody in the right mind would go in a complex search for latest sports scores or the weather or movie recommendation. You basically ask.
Yes.
It's dramatically quicker.
Yes.
At least for these specific data sources, the system's already very much better than you can basically search manually.
Yes.
And it just in the last 3 to 4 years. We're going to have exactly the same impact on the business data. You will be able to ask questions, simple and it's actually fairly complex, like in data lingua, and it just answers back.
No, this is interesting because I just seen somebody talking on Facebook that 10 years ago, a newbie would come to the web browser and would type a question into the URL box, what is the capital of Australia, and thought they're idiots. And now actually, works like they try to do what they try to do. Right, the systems adopted, right, and the systems basically serve what they try to do.
Right.
So I think this is great. So I want to shift gears a little bit and kind of talk about how you came to do this, and also had the kind of privilege to look at the data lingua code base at some point in the past, and I was as a Scala guy, I must say this is like one of the cleanest, best maintained code bases, and you actually wrote a lot of the code yourself, and you also work both in Scala and in JavaScript, and I'm and you're basically helping drive two companies. So I just want to understand how this is possible. Why did you use Scala? Can you talk a little bit about the development, right? So you have basically kind of active hand in the development of data lingua. How does it work for you, and kind of what's most interesting for you to build this system from scratch?
Well, the idea of data lingua came to me when I was acting CEO of Great Gain Systems. So obviously you cannot run two companies in parallel. So what I did, I founded a small team in St. Petersburg, Russia, that basically spent next 2 years prototyping this in different ways. We started with the computational linguistics. It didn't work. We moved into deep learning and neural networks and double in this direction. Didn't work. And eventually we settled on what I'm going to be talking today, like a grammar, semantic grammar. And that space is fairly fresh and new. I mean, there's quite a few research going on, like in Apple, by the way, and Microsoft. But essentially, up until very recently, it was just, having essential research project with, 2 or 3 people. Sometimes we had up to 5 or 6 people in a team. And, having run Great Gain for many years, I kind of learned how to do it, in a very, economical, in a bootstrap fashion. We use a lot of open source software. The typical infrastructure today for a SaaS company is very inexpensive to develop and run and launch. And it's still, data lingua is still a very, very infancy. It's still a pre-funding stage, which I kind of, as an advisor, as a kind of a founding member of a team, I always recommend that, you delay the fundraising till you absolutely necessarily have to fundraise to raise to scale the company. Not the scale, to actually launch it properly. But I think data lingua today is in the stage where there is a working public version, initial version. There is what we call, minimally viable product out. It's rapidly gaining traction. It's live. Everybody can sign up for free, at least today. So I think the next 6 months for the team would be to really listen for the feedback from early users, to really, quickly iterate over the product market fit, and get to the point where they will be ready to fundraise.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure that once folks see the presentation, they will see the full potential. But I still want to dwell a bit on your on your ability to be in the code. I mean, a lot of executives are not able to do this, right? I mean, and even if they did this in the past, they kind of move away from this. So you're actually able to do this, and you do it in a very rigorous way. So I'm just in our meetups, we actually like this angle, right? Like we get a lot of technical founders, and I think especially for the platform companies, cutting edge, interfacing with a lot of systems, you need to be technical enough. So it looks like like look at Spark. Most co-founders are actual open source developers, right? And authors of the original system, and then the system becomes extremely popular among other developers, right? And so I think that like. I think with Apache Ignite, I think you kind of hope for the same, see the same trajectory. So I'm really curious if you can shed light on this, because it's not very typical and it's not very common. We get a technical founder, and also I think you're spanning these two worlds, right? You're spanning the back end and front end, and it's usually two disparate worlds. It's extremely hard to find and. But that link was beautifully done, right? That's kind of, I think it's really, you were able to build the UI, which kind of you see it's very professional. You basically think like it was built by a huge team of people, right? Like there is a lot of details and kind of you are bootstrapping this with a startup. So I wonder how you were able to do this and being a technical founder. How it helps you knowing the code base to guide the technical project like this to completion, and what would be your advice to other founders? Kind of if they want to stay technical or be more technical, right? Like what is the importance, especially like having a technical co-founder, being in the code, being close to code to manage and build a system like this?
Yeah, well, that's a kind of loaded question, I agree, but I can tell you my kind of view on this, having run the company, raised millions of dollars in venture capital. There is no non-technical founders. Mm-hmm. Salespeople never start anything. Mm-hmm. Marketing people never start a company. They may think they started, but basically they have no idea, which is always wrong, and they hire some technical people that basically prove them wrong. The only people with almost absolute certainty that start the companies today, especially in our area here, are technical people. Mm-hmm. Now, not every technical person could be a good manager, could be a good CEO, or could be good salespeople, and it's perfectly fine. But being technical is almost prerequisite. If you're not technical, if you're not technologist, there is no way you can start anything. Mm-hmm. Very, very rarely. Even if you hear that the company was started by salespeople, you just don't hear the other story. You just don't hear the other people who were involved in very much the same beginning. Because salespeople, and nothing against salespeople, by the way, they're extremely important in a certain point of company.
You have to sell the stuff.
Exactly. But initially, when you build a product, build a service, it can be done only by technologists. So that's going to answer one of your questions. How do you keep yourself being, an executive in a company and raising money and managing sales and marketing team and still coding? I like what I'm doing. So, I always run 2 or 3 projects in parallel. Obviously, there's one project that occupies most of the time, like Grid Game. When you run the Grid Game as CEO, obviously that occupies most of your time. But if you're good with your timing, if you have a certain level of productivity personally, you can definitely have 2 or 3 projects running in parallel. Mm-hmm. And doesn't mean you have to be involved in every one of them coding 100%, but you can establish a certain organization, you can establish certain engineering discipline. Mm-hmm. It's very important to have an eye for UI and study constantly the new UI concepts and user experience concepts and how the new UI is built, and I do that religiously. That helps me basically drive and comment on the UI, mm-hmm. and ensure that the UI is done to a certain level, mm-hmm. which we'll like. But again, it's there's nothing earth-shattering here. It's I agree with you. There are a lot of developers kind of shy from UI because it's a very different mindset. Mm-hmm. It probably helps me. I grew up in a very different, unusual family. My father was one of the largest collectors of art in Russia. Mm-hmm. So I grew up across the paintings. I grew up in colors and shapes and form from a very early age. So it's kind of near and dear to me. Mm-hmm. Both like photography, which is also a very kind of geometrical, colorful, semantical world, if you will. Visual in many ways. So these things do help. But it also helps probably more than this is to involve people who understand the same concept, because you're not going to be doing everything, and it's fine. It's easy to do when a company of 5 or 6 people. Everybody's writing code. Mm-hmm. Pretty simple as this. When you grow to 15, 20 people, not everybody is writing code.
Yes.
You're 30, 40, forget it.
Minority.
Yeah. As a CEO, you're basically HR person in the company. So, so guess what? Yes, hiring the people initially or involving the people who share the same outlook and what the good engineering is, both on the back end and the front end, is critically important.
Great. I mean, this is some great insights. And on this kind of UI theme, there are so many details. Typically, the role of PM emerged, and so the role of PM was for a long time was a mystery to me until I came to, and actually, I kind of have a hobby, kind of asking different organizations. So I've been at Microsoft. I was in the cafeteria with developers and asked them what do they think PMs do, and kind of they overall mystify it, and kind of they say like they're running around with Excel spreadsheets and they report to the other senior PMs, and so right. But in startups, it's crucial. So I've met some really great PMs, right? And it's another difficult level to have PMs in the data space because they need to understand various aspects. So I wonder, did you have PM in your team? Are you your own PM? Like, what would, in order to achieve this UI, most startups believe you need to have a very strict PM who will drive every feature on some kind of Kanban system. So how did you do your PM?
Yeah, I think actually the need for a product management is clear. I mean, practically for anybody right now. It is the complete beach to hire it.
Mm-hmm.
I'll give you an example. At Great Gain, the company is almost 10 years old. We don't have a PM.
Mm-hmm.
We tried multiple times. It's because the PM is the kind of job that runs triage between sales, marketing, and engineering.
Mm-hmm.
It has to be very independent, it has to be technically minded, and has to have an understanding of marketing and sales. It's a very hard position to hire. Naturally, when a young company, when I say young, it's like seed level or pre-funding company, you don't need a PM. You are a PM.
Mm-hmm.
Founders are a product management.
Mm-hmm.
Because if you don't have an idea what you're building, you don't have to be it's something that's wrong. But PM comes into place when it's very, if you're what I call, if you've seen the movie in developing a company over the time, you will sense, because when you're going to start seeing a lot of friction between sales, marketing, and engineering,
mm-hmm.
that is not resolvable by quick emails,
mm-hmm.
and you constantly run in the meetings, and tensions fly. That's where you need a product management.
Mm-hmm.
Because typically, startups do run for quite some time with founders being the PMs.
Mm-hmm.
Because that's most of the ideas of a product or service that came from. But rapidly, and typically it's anywhere when the company grows over like 50 people or something like this, when you have 5 or 6 people in sales organization, you have 3 or 4 or 5 people in marketing, and 20, 25 in engineering, that's typically where we start to see basically a lot of friction. And the only way to isolate that friction is to move this function to a person
mm-hmm.
who will work very closely with engineering, understand features, but drive basically essentially the game between these 3 functions of the company: sales,
mm-hmm.
marketing, and engineering. I think it's wrong to think that product PMs will somehow develop the features on their own
mm-hmm.
in some kind of secret room.
Mm-hmm.
It's typically not. It's typically sales people will come some ideas from clients, marketing will come some ideas, engineering will come with most of the ideas. The job of a PM is to really kind of corral this information in a proper way,
mm-hmm.
and be this kind of mediator between 3 equally important parts of the company.
Mm-hmm.
So I think the function of PMs are pretty simple. It is extremely hard to hire them.
Do you think they have a certain master? Of all these 3 things, are they really should be equal, or are they different in different companies? Do PM effectively convey orders or ideas from management of some kind, right, down to the engineering, or
No.
creative?
That's a wrong way to look. I mean, obviously, in the bigger companies, it could be any kind of setup. But in a small startup, typically, it's a technical position
mm-hmm.
first and foremost, because typically engineering teams are much bigger
mm-hmm.
than sales and marketing teams, at least initially.
Mm-hmm.
When you're talking about the small startups.
So they have to communicate well with engineers.
Absolutely,
first.
because typically the typically PMs start taking away some of the mind share from engineering. Because typically it will be marketing and sales complain about engineering. That something isn't done on time, or they're doing something else,
Right.
or they're not giving us a lot of features, or something is broken.
Right.
So typically, marketing sales complain, and engineering basically tells you, well, leave us alone, we're just ranking up the code here on a daily basis.
Right.
So this prototypical person will come in and start managing this process, so that there is somebody in the between, so the people don't constantly talk to each other directly. But there is, and obviously there's a conversation, directly communication as much as you like, but there is a person whose responsibility to manage this relationship between the three aspects of the company. And it gets more complicated, you get, product, you get, partnerships and other things going on. You get professional services going on. All of a sudden, you get, your marketing grows dramatically over time with different functions. So PMs become much more and more involved. And, you grow over 100 people. As a CEO of a company, you don't even know what engineering does. You only interface with them as a product marketing people or product management people. Sorry. So, and that's good because you can only manage so many things.
Yes.
You have to constantly hire the best and isolate yourself so you can basically spend quality time managing the functions you can manage. But I always keep saying the best job the CEO can do is to hire the best people to get out of the way. And I always say another thing that. When you build a good team, but you can go on vacation for 8 months and nothing really happens in the company bad. And it's kind of, sad in a way because you're not important anymore on a daily basis, and for founders it's very hard. But if you go for a couple of weeks away and nothing bad happens, and just business continues to go as planned, that you have a minimally good team in place.
Yeah, no, that's a great insight. But I mean, in your case, it may mean that you will, go and hack something in Scala and Angular, right, on your own. So I'll probably kind of, close with this question, right, because also members of SF Scala meetup kind of overlaps with SF Text a lot. Typical choice, kind of for good choice for backend, but you also build your frontend in Angular and have a very interesting insight that Angular makes it easier to manage a project than say React, right? So which I find extremely interesting because it's not something typical you see in comparisons of React versus Angular. So maybe you can kind of explain why you chose Scala and Angular for the stack for Datalingua, and how do you see, are you sticking with this going forward? How is this working out? How do you think it's going to scale? And we'll check your prediction of scale up next year or next time. So
Scala is very simple. I love Scala. I haven't touched Java in like 6 years. I don't even actually remember how Java looks.
Very ugly.
Probably. Even Java 8 probably doesn't make it any better. So Scala was a natural choice. It's a great language. Languages, we can use any languages, but it's very productive to think in Scala. Think in a strongly typed environment, which is very functional in degree, but not as opinionated like Haskell, for example. You can still write OOP code when you need it, and you can be functional when you need it, when you like it. So I like Scala. I like the practicality of Scala, which I've studied in many functional languages. Nothing stick to me, but I like Scala because it's very practical. It's done, surprisingly, it's done by a guy from academia, but it's done very much in engineering fashion.
Mark moved between academia.
Right. So there's a lot of shortcuts, and I like that. It's a very practical language. It's not, if you look at Haskell, it's much cleaner, but it's massively opinionated. It's hard to build anything beyond the toy projects on it.
Yes.
Which is another problem that's impossible to find.
There's not many libraries. Or,
yeah.
So the community, right? It's inherently limited.
Exactly. As far as Angular, I remember when Datalingua actually started, and by the way, Grid Game project also has a AngularJS based UI components as well. We loved AngularJS for one fundamental reason. If you're building some hello worlds, right, anything can work. You can write it in the jQuery directly. React works perfectly fine. Meteor works perfectly fine. AngularJS works perfectly fine. It is when your project grows quite a bit significantly. Especially Angular 1 impose a certain structure in the projects with controllers, with whole kind of MVC model or MVC-like model, which in the beginning looks like a constraint and awkward. It's too much boilerplate. But the minute you actually grow into the 5, 10 controllers, 10, 20 services and whatnot and templates, all of a sudden you start to appreciate that. Needless to say, it's a massive ecosystem. It's a massive community. It's probably #1, front-end framework. It works beautifully with Bootstrap and HTML5 compatible, obviously, and everything else. So it's a perfect way to build systems like DataLingua. You guys going to show. I'm going to see it today. It looks solid.
Yep.
Everything is built in AngularJS, and just knowing by people who build it. What actually surprised me a lot a couple of years ago is that the development in JavaScript is very close to development in Scala. It's very functional, especially with libraries like Lodash, that gives you pretty much exactly the same, routines that you have in Scala. It's a very, very functional approach. JavaScript in itself is kind of a little bit dirty language, but it's functional in nature. Although it doesn't have strongly.
You have to look closely.
Yeah, it's very loose, and there's no strongly typed anything there. But
there is a keyword let I learned recently in the new standard, which confused me with a camel for a moment.
Yeah, I'm not going there, but but fundamentally, I was surprised when I looked in the code too. Is that if you have a strong functional background, it's very easy to jump back and forth between Scala and JavaScript, because very much the same things apply. Obviously, there's a lot of differences in in syntactical things and whatnot, and performance optimization is dramatically different. But I think it was a lot harder to jump between Java and JavaScript than between, let's say, Scala and JavaScript, which was quite epiphany to me.
Interesting.
So anybody who's writing in Scala, unless you're completely puking about UI work, it's a very easy kind of shift back and forth between solid JavaScript work and especially people like work with Akka, for example, because JavaScript is fully asynchronous. There's nothing synchronous in JavaScript. It's a one-threaded environment. You have to constantly work with futures and what's called the promises in JavaScript. So all this background from Scala developers comes extremely handy.
Nice. So it almost looks like we are looking for, with Akka HTTP and Akka Stream. So we're almost ready for the framework which will connect Angular to, Akka Streams on the backend, and then everything will be fully reactive.
There's a socket.io. There's this world. Look, you think Scala ecosystem is full. Look at the NPM. Look at the JavaScript ecosystem. There is like 100 times more libraries, and everything is available. Yeah, front end world is swimming in choices.
So hopefully, maybe we'll get some time. We are looking for somebody who will teach kind of Angular for Scala developers, right? Maybe we can recommend somebody. But I think this is really exciting and encouraging. So I hope we'll see more full stack people. This will be kind of focus of this year. We'll have a hackathon later on in SS Scala, where we'll build full stack applications. So anybody who wants to learn, hopefully you guys will join and will come. Thank you very much, Nikita. This was great. We have a lot of more questions, but we'll save them for the next meetup talk or a conference. And we're looking forward to your presentation tonight.
Thank you. All right.